Hey guys, welcome back to the Life's Worth Living podcast. I'm your host, John Gossett, and we welcome you back for another week, another episode, and another amazing story. Tonight we want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, to GTM Builders, for allowing us to record in this beautiful model home. If you're in the market and you're thinking about building, check out GTM Builders at gtmbuilders.com. Sponsor of tonight's episode is A. Warner Homes Real Estate. If you're in the market for buying or selling, interest rates are at historic lows, check out A. Warner Homes Real Estate or give them a call at 801-867-5078. Also tonight, we want to thank a sponsor and someone that's going to be housing our guest tonight, Comfort Inn and Suites in Lake Point, for being a sponsor of tonight's episode. If you're coming out to the Tooele Valley and coming out to see all that Tooele has to offer, or maybe you've got family coming into the area, check out Comfort Inn and Suites, or give them a call at 801-250-3600. It's a pretty nice hotel. Hopefully your room's nice and everything.
The hotel is nice, and this is a very nice home. This is a beautiful home.
So I'll tell you, GTM does some great work. So I was stoked when they were willing to put their name with mine and allow us this space, and I imagine pretty soon they're going to be sold out of this neighborhood and we'll have to move to another model home. But for now, it was really nice of them to give us a TV with our logo on it and everything. So they're good guys. Yeah. Well, we got a special guest for you tonight, Bill Schuffenhauer. And I am super stoked. I don't want to give your intro because I want to tell your story. I want you to tell it. But I'll tell you, Bill is an Olympian, bobsledder, silver medalist, and that's all I'm going to give away. And I'm going to let you kind of take it. And let's back up. And where did you grow up?
Yeah, so local kid, grew up here in Salt Lake City. I've lived here for the most part my whole life, 47 years now of my life. Did move away for a short period of time to Moscow, Idaho.
The big town.
Went far, far away. But yeah, for the most part, grew up my entire life here in Salt Lake City, Utah. And, as a young kid, it is what it is. We'll just kind of jump right into it. I was born into a very different situation than most kids are. And that was being born into a situation where I had parents that were addicted to drugs and lived on and off the streets on a regular basis. And, I was that prototypical kid who was just part of the system and always in trouble as a youth and exposed to a lot of things that we just don't typically see on a regular day-to-day basis. I was doing drugs and hanging out with the worst of worst people as a young kid and doing that stuff with my parents, all the way up until seventh, eighth grade. And, that's what I was used to. And fortunately for me, at some point in time, I was bouncing back and forth and from foster homes. And, as mentioned before, in and out of 17 different foster homes as a young kid. And one of the times my mom got in trouble with the law again. And I had the option either to go to my 18th foster home or the state gave my grandma an option to take me in. And that was the beginning of the end for me, is moving from the big city of Salt Lake City to Roy, Utah.
Well, so tell me, I've heard that part of your story before, but tell me, what was foster care like? Kind of give me a glimpse of to what living in foster care was like for you.
Yeah, I mean, for a young kid, it's scary, right? Mm-hmm. Because you, at the end of every single day, you just want to be with your mom and your dad as a kid. And typically, those situations would lead that, my mom got in trouble, so I was taken away, or there were some times where my mom just took off to go partying and didn't come home, so I'd wake up to strange people in our place and packing my stuff and getting ready to ship me off. So it wasn't that foster care was bad, but as a kid, it's not where you wanted to be. And so it was just a very different environment, very foreign, for any kid. And it just wasn't a happy place for me.
Did it make you feel like you didn't want to get attached? You didn't want to unpack your bags because you didn't know when you were going to be...
Yeah, and rules are a lot different nowadays. So the rules that are set in place keep you from being inside of that vicious cycle. But back then, my mom would get in trouble. I'd get taken out and put into a foster home. She'd get out of jail or rehab or whatever it was, go plead to the court to get her kids back, and they'd send you right back. And so that was part of that vicious cycle. So you didn't ever really get established, or you didn't, build any roots or foundations where you were, because you're always going to get sent back no matter what. So that just led to a lot of inconsistencies in life, and it's just turbulent times, not happy.
But 17 foster homes, and you went and lived with your grandma.
And that didn't even include the different times I went and lived with my grandma as well. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And how was it with grandma?
That's more of a comforting place because it is grandma. It was times that was hard, and there were times it was great, but you always knew that you were with family. And my sister, one of my older sisters, lived with my grandma at that time, and so it was nice to be around her and see her more often. And that was pretty much the only structure I had growing up is when I did get to go home with, and live with grandma. And interesting enough, looking back, grandma was always taking in her kids as kids and trying to do what she could as a grandma and a mom, playing a role model. So it was probably one of the better places for me at the time.
And how many siblings did you have?
So I have an older brother, 2 older sisters, and a younger brother.
Gotcha.
So that I know of. We always joke about that we know of. So.
Oh man. So you have this kind of a traumatic youth. I mean, going in and out of these places and seeing things that maybe most young kids don't see on a daily basis. How old were you when you moved in with your grandma?
That was the beginning of my 7th grade year.
Gotcha.
And I remember that clearly because, again, I was running the streets all the time and doing the things that whatever I wanted to do, and taking me out of my space, for, if you will, from Salt Lake City to Roy was really a big wake up call for me, because there wasn't the same type of street life, there wasn't the crime, and so. Timing wise, probably one of the best, timings for me to move away from Salt Lake and kind of take me out of that environment of the chaos that I was living on a day-to-day basis. But that was the beginning of the 7th grade year.
Wow. So tell me, where does life take you in your junior high and high school years?
Interesting enough, when I moved up there, obviously a much different environment. I stood out like a sore thumb because I was a kid of color at the time. There wasn't a whole lot of that up in Roy, Utah. I didn't really fit in, but I really wanted to fit in. And that was my first opportunity noticing kids living a different life than I was used to. They were happy. They were, coming to school with nice, clean clothes and brand new clothes, where I was used to wearing the same thing, hand-me-downs, and hand-me-downs from the state or going to get clothes from the DI when we could. And so I just wanted to try to really fit in. And, I enjoyed and was attracted to the energy I saw and noticed through some of the other kids. And so I tried to, I was trying to figure out what do you need to do as a 7th grade kid? How are you trying to figure that out? How do you fit in where, there's, backgrounds we come from, talking about kids with depression, right, is a lot of times that goes completely the opposite way. But I was fortunate enough, I was attracted to one kid. His name is Jake Schultz, and I've talked about him in my documentary in several hundreds of stages. And I just looked at him because he was a kid that everyone looked up to. Kind of like that All-American kid. He played all the sports. He was part of the student body, and just everyone liked him. And one time I just watched him after school. Kind of followed him around, kind of creepy like. And he goes, I stalked him. And after school, he goes out to the field where there's a whole bunch of other kids. And, they're out there in their workout gear and they're, doing these things, handoffs and jumping over things. And I was like, oh, that looks like a lot of fun. And I was like, oh, maybe I'll get involved with that because, I was like, at the time, I was used to running from cops and jumping fences, and so this looked like it was right up my alley, right? And so, of course, it was track and field, but that was my 7th grade year, so it was already too late because they already had the cuts, and so the next year I was like, okay, I'll go out the next year, and so went out for track and field the next year. Unfortunately, I hadn't done much in making sure that my grades were taken care of, and so my grades were suffering, but I'd made the cuts already. And unfortunately, you have that saying that you can take the kid out of the street, but you can't take the street out of the kid. And mouthed off to the coaches and got in trouble for that and got kicked off the track team my 8th grade year. And it was a big setback for me, and I knew that I wanted to do something different, and I wanted to change my lifestyle and change it for the better. And that was kind of a slap in the face reality check for myself. And so that next year, getting ready for my 9th grade year, I actually went to the track coaches and I went to my teachers and said, what do I need to do to have an opportunity to be a track and field athlete? And thankfully, I surrounded myself with some great teachers and mentors at the time, still as a junior high kid, asking these adult type questions. And we had to focus on, obviously my grades had to come up significantly. So they worked with me over the summer to improve those, and then had to work on the attitude and the mindset, right? To be able to play in a team atmosphere and be a part of a team. And so we worked on that over the summer, and that following year, the 9th grade year, pulled my grades from pretty much all S to a 3.8 grade point average. A lot of hard work. And finally made the track team, and that was literally, again, another beginning to the end of me just really finding my path and having an opportunity to change my stars from there on out for the future.
Wow. And so you graduate from Roy,
Utah.
Roy High.
Go Royals, yeah.
There you go. And what happens after high school? Where do you head?
Yes. So I had scholarship offers all over the country to go pretty much anywhere I wanted to. And I had a scholarship offer from Weber State University. And my high school track coach was really good friends with Weber State's track and field coach. And they decided that I was going to stay home. And so I stayed local and went to Weber State, competed there for 4 years in the sport of track and field, decathlon. Had a pretty decent career. Didn't go exactly the way I wanted to, but that was also part of the process too. Of I hadn't learned all the lessons as an athlete, and so through college I was partying and doing some of the things that you shouldn't really be doing as a student athlete, and not really super laser focused on what I was doing. And I was given some pretty good talents by the man upstairs, so I was able to kind of get away with not putting all the effort in and still doing really well at competitions. And so, went through 4 years of college, and I remember looking back and having goals when I first came into college. And when I finished college, I was like, wow, I'd never accomplished any of those goals because I was off doing a lot of the stupid things that we talked about. And so the next step was, I knew I wanted to train for the Olympics because the coaches had talked me into, if you go to the Olympics, you're set for life, right? And so I wanted to surround myself with the very best coaches and athletes I possibly could. And so I wrote a letter to Dan O'Brien and Coach Mike Keller up in Moscow, Idaho. Dan at the time was the #1 ranked decathlete in the world, and his coaches were the top ranked coaches in the decathlon, track and field. And they wrote me a letter back and said, hey, we'd love to have you. And so I took a Greyhound bus from Ogden, Utah to Moscow, Idaho. Was not the funnest time of my life. And went up there and trained with some of the best of the best for 2 years. And it is what it is. Life eventually brought me back here to Salt Lake City, Utah to train with my college coaches. And by that time, I'd really understood that, you can't go out and do all the partying, and you really had to focus. If it's something you really wanted to do, you had to put the effort forth. And so we did. And things were going really, really well. Did the first decathlon, first part of the year, scored over 8,000 points. I was the 51st American to ever do so in history still to date.
Wow.
And qualified for Olympic trials, was ranked #1 in the world at the time. Still early in the season, but kind of a cool thing to add to your athletic resume.
What age are you right now?
Oh, good grief. Let's see. That was 2000, so 26 maybe, somewhere around there.
Nice.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a long time ago.
Ranked first in the world.
Yeah, first
That's
in the
pretty
world.
impressive.
So fun stuff. So things were going really, really well. Nutrition, training, mindset, everything was on point. Working with my coaches again, I felt like I was at home. I was comfort. And we go and do another decathlon partway through the season. We score even more points. So at that point, the rest of the decathletes around the world had done some decathlons, and so they posted some scores, but I still was maintaining a top 5 world ranking. And, it was the year that I was going to make it to the Olympics, and everybody knew it was going to happen, and we were all excited about it. And 2 weeks before Olympic trials, we go down to Brigham Young University just to do a warm-up meet, and happened to be raining that day, and I blew out my ankle on the long jump board. And pretty devastating time. We thought that we could still push through, but we didn't realize is that I didn't have to continue to keep pushing forward because we'd already qualified for Olympic trials. And then, if we would have stopped right then and not done any of the other events, we would have been good to go.
Fine.
Still been fine. But we pushed through and went and did the shot put, and then attempted to do the high jump, and that's where we ended up doing significantly a lot more damage. And that was pretty much the game changer and the nail in the coffin for my career to make it to the Olympics in the decathlon.
So how did that, I can imagine, but how did that leave you feeling?
I was devastated, and if that was one of the times in my life where I felt absolutely defeated, which led into my real first bout of significant depression. And at the time, I didn't understand what depression was. I just, I felt bad, and my dreams had gone down the tube, and something that you worked for your whole entire life, and realized that you changed your stars from being a street kid to potentially have an opportunity to write your ticket to history and being an Olympian, and that all just came crashing down, and I was devastated.
So did you feel at that point that the Olympics were never going to be in your future? It was just over?
Yeah, I basically had given up because I didn't know anything different, right? I was a track and field athlete, and I didn't do anything else. I did some football, but I didn't do any other sports, and that was my sport, and that was my vision and my future for myself.
And so, did you have time to rethink, regroup, and say, okay, I'm going to do this now, or you just are just kind of it's over?
It was done. I was over. And, I recall walking off the track, and my coaches were like, what do you want to do now? What's the next step? Because typically you're always okay, you hit a hurdle. And it's okay, instead of letting it defeat you, let's figure out what's the next step. How can we pivot and go in a different direction? And I was just done. I went home and basically put my tail between my legs and just gave up on the whole Olympic dream, and was all right, I guess I'll just go back to school. Didn't really have any idea what I was going to do, but again, depression kicked in, and I, it is what it is. I sat home at my apartment and literally woke up and drank every single day, and crutched around because I had to use crutches for about 2 months because of the severity of my injury. And thankfully, the universe works in very weird and mysterious ways.
Yes, it does.
Right. I had a friend that approached me and said, hey, what do you think about doing the Olympics in Salt Lake City? I'm like, what are you talking about? The Olympics are in Sydney, and I've missed it because the window's come and gone. They're like, no, what do you think about doing the Winter Olympics? And of course, I'm like, Winter Olympics? Okay, I don't ski. I don't figure skate. What are you talking about? Because I've never done a winter sport. And they're like, no, there's this sport called the bobsled. And athletes that are track and field, high explosive, powerful athletes, football players, transition really well into this sport. And, funny enough, I didn't even know that we were having the Winter Olympics here in Salt Lake City.
Really?
That's how foreign it was to me.
You were just focused on Sydney.
Just Sydney, and that was it. That was my thing. And so we brought it up with my track and field coaches, and we started saying, hey, what if? What if you could really do this? And it's a year and 3 months before the Olympics in Salt Lake City, which is unheard of, any athlete transitioning into a completely different sport, especially at that level, and having an opportunity.
Being at the top of your game in that short period of time.
And, we just basically sat there and said, well, honestly, what if we could make this happen? What if we could literally write your story, the kid who grew up on the streets of Salt Lake City and turned his life around to make the Olympics in Salt End City? And that really sparked my interest. And we were like, well, what if we could? And what do we have to lose? And at the end of the day, we had nothing to lose. And all we had to do was take everything that we had put into track and field, lift it up, and dump it into a bobsled bucket and just go for it and see what happens. And, the biggest driver for me was, what if I could write that story?
Yeah.
And talking about, we could write a movie and do a book, and how cool would that be, right? And in my head, I was like, how cool would that be if I could actually turn everything around and compete in the same city where I grew up homeless? And so we did. We just went for it. And, I played around with, some of the lower USA teams and just became a student of the sport and just really focused on learning the sport in and out, first and foremost. And, just went out there and competed and did my job every single day. And lo and behold, 2 weeks before Olympic trials, I'm still on Team USA 5 with a very slim chance, very, very slim chance of even having the hopes of making an Olympic team. And 2 weeks before Olympic trials, I get a call from the number one U.S. team, who's happened to be ranked number one in the world. And they said, hey, we've been watching you over the last year, and you've been doing really, really well, and you've excelled at bobsled, and we want to know if you want to have an opportunity to come on our team. And basically, because we're ranked number one in the world, we're given a bye to the Olympic team. So they're already on the Olympic team because they're ranked number one in the world. And they said, we want to give you an opportunity to be our alternate. And you thinking that somebody would be like, yeah, let's go for it right away, right? And I was like, well, let me talk to my teammates about it first. And so I'm pretty sure, to their shock, that was my response, because I didn't accept it right away. And went and talked to my teammates, and thankfully I had teammates that were very, very willing and understood what was going on. And with their blessing, they just said, hey, this is your opportunity, and this is what you've been waiting for, and this is your Willy Wonka ticket to go to the Olympics. And
it's really cool.
So I eventually the next day I called Todd Hayes back, said, hey, I'd love to have that opportunity. And interesting thing that I don't really talk about a whole lot other than just making the team is, Todd was like, okay, you're going to you have to understand that a lot of other athletes and coaches are going to be pretty pissed off because you showed up out of nowhere when all these guys have been here and trying to make the Olympics their whole life.
You get moved to the front of the line.
You're getting moved to the front of the line. And so he says, so even though we're given a bye to the Olympics, we don't technically have to compete in the Olympic trials, but we want to actually have you compete with the other guys and in just the four-man, just so we can prove that we made the right decision. And so we did. And obviously, lo and behold, went and competed with those guys in Olympic trials and literally had better times with me on the sled and just dominated the competition. And
wow.
And so we kind of proved our point and proved that they made the right decision by asking me to come onto the team. And from that point on, I was just the alternate on the team. But, I reflect back on like just having that conversation, like what if we could write that story, right? And now it's actually a reality that I've finally made the team in my own hometown, 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City, and no thoughts of even competing. I was just excited to be on the Olympic team, even as an alternate, and went with the team over to Europe and did my job as an alternate, made sure my teammates had their bag and their gear and their food, and did all the stuff that I was supposed to do as an alternate. And a couple weeks prior to the Olympic Games here in Salt Lake City, we're in San Diego at the Olympic Training Center, and we're doing race-offs against a team, just making sure we're continuing to sharpen our skills and make sure that John's running as fast as he was supposed to be running a couple months ago, and I'm running as fast or if not faster as well. And one day the coaches called me up and said, hey, we want to have you start like doing some training sessions with the team, because at that point in time I wasn't doing any training sessions with the team. I'd go out to track practices, but I wasn't working on the timing and stuff. And so for a week we started working on timing just on the track, and that following week they're like, hey, we want you when we go back to Salt Lake City, we actually want to put you on the sled and see how things go. And did a couple of practices, and that was kind of again did better than some of the other teammates that they had on the team, and kind of punched my way and my ticket to actual compete in the Olympics, and then obviously go and win the first Olympic medal for the U.S. in over 46 years, and a silver medal.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So now this is, I don't know if you've been asked this before, but was it fun?
Oh man.
Did you enjoy the sport? Was it fun?
There's if you're an adrenaline junkie, which I kind of am, there's something very exciting and fun about going down a sled 95 plus miles per hour and hitting 6.5 G forces of pressure. And just, it's painful. I'll be honest with you. It is painful. But it's exhilarating at the same time. Just going down that track as fast as you possibly can, all powered by man.
So top to bottom, what's the amount of seconds?
So the entire run, each track is different all around the world just because they're built differently. But here in Park City, you're about a mile in length. So you're doing about just shy of a minute to get all the way down to the bottom of the track, averaging about 89 miles per hour.
That's crazy.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Crazy. So wrecks.
Oh yeah. Definitely have had my fair share of wrecks.
You were saying that it's painful. It hurts. I'm thinking, wrecks on a bobsled, I can imagine are painful.
Are really painful. Yeah, because there's no seat belts, right? There's nothing to keep you in the sled.
No airbags.
No airbags. There's no roll cage for you. And so when that sled crashes, you learn early on that it depends on the track. Depends on where you're at in the track, and depends on how fast you're going. Because, think about jumping out of your car at 95 miles per hour on the highway.
Yeah.
There's going to be some consequences, and it's the same thing in bobsled. People in your head, you think, oh, you're just skating on ice, but ice is no different than concrete. It's going to rip your skin apart. And so, we wear burn suits underneath our outfits, but then we also have gloves, and then we have the helmets. So you learn to they call it head and shoulders. So you put your head on the ice when you're sliding, and when your necks get tired, you put your shoulder. When it starts heating up too hot, put your head back on.
Rotate.
Because and if you don't have the burn suit, it'll just burn your skin and your bone right off your body. But again, it also depends on where you're at in the track too, where it's okay to come out and hopefully you don't fly out of the track, because that's always possible, and that's happened, and people have been killed in crashing in bobsleds. And so the better you know your sport, obviously, the safer you're going to be when something like that happens.
That's amazing. So you end up competing in Salt Lake. So tell me, here it's your kind of the home court advantage. Your home. This is your where you've been practicing, where you've been doing everything. What's your most vivid memory of the Olympics?
Oh man,
I know you've got probably many, but
there's
one moment that stands out. What is it?
Honestly, it's probably there's two that are probably at the same level, and it was one when we were walking into the opening ceremonies, because I had a lot of time to reflect on the path that got me there, all the way back to where I was a kid growing up on the streets in the foster care and looking at the same mountains that I'm now looking at with the Olympic rings on the side of the mountain, and hearing and then walking with all the other countries and hearing the announcers talk about Team USA and knowing that you're a part of that and knowing that there's billions of people around the world watching that at that very moment. And you're realizing that you're literally writing history, not only for yourself, but for your country and for the Olympic movement. That was huge. And then just, being a part of bringing the world back together after 9/11 is so huge, right? And
Salt Lake had its challenges, wondering if you were even going to be able to have it. And then there was the whole mess with the Salt Lake.
The craziness.
It was nuts. I remember that time and thinking, is it going to happen?
Yeah. And, and we, I get an opportunity to talk about it too. President Bush actually pulled the U.S. team aside and said, hey, we're considering canceling the Olympics, but we want to leave it up to the athletes. And, for the athletes, we just, we were like, this is a no-brainer for us. This is what the Olympics are all about. That's what the Olympic rings and all those colors of the Olympic rings, which represents, at least one color of every flag in the world. And it's our opportunity as athletes and Olympic athletes to try and bring the world back together in this very global chaotic this moment. And so, we were just like, yeah, let's do it. We're going to rely on our service people in the military to keep us safe, and just go out there and do what we do, and try and bring the world back together. And so that was, a huge moment for us, and to be a part of that, and that history was amazing. And, and then of course the next coolest moment was walking out in the awards ceremony and getting that Olympic medal draped over your head, and looking out into the crowd and seeing your family there holding up signs telling you that dreams do come true, and just being able to share that, not only with the world, but you're sharing that with your family. And then that realization, that conversation you had a year and 3 months ago, that what if we could really write that story, and now realizing that we did write that story and it worked out perfectly.
That's amazing. And I think I heard you interviewed where you were getting the medal, thinking about being on the streets and looking for food in garbage cans.
Yeah.
Just a short distance away from where you're being awarded this incredible honor.
Yeah. And I never even realized that. And it was several years later, I was doing an interview with somebody, and I think it was when we were getting ready to do my documentary, and somebody said, how far away from where you actually received your Olympic medal were you, like sleeping on the streets and eating out of garbage cans? And I was like a block away, because it was right downtown, the Triad Center.
Yeah.
And that's, a stone's throw away from where all the homeless issues are happening in Rio Grande and all that stuff. And it's just, even years later, it just is like, wow, that's, pretty amazing to have an opportunity to receive your Olympic medal in the same arena, if you will, where you were eating out of a garbage can years earlier. So.
Okay, so let me back up and ask you something that I've never heard you answer before, or have anybody question. So your mother, she was in a bad place off and on through her adult life. Was she there to watch you?
Yeah, so I have answered that question.
But have you? I haven't heard it.
But yeah, very rarely people ever ask me that, and it was actually a pretty epic moment as well for myself, because prior to the Olympics, anytime I was doing something really, really well, or had an athletic accomplishment or accomplishment with school and stuff, I would always go and try and still tell my mom, because again, at the end of the day, the people that you want to be most proud of you is your parents. Yeah. And even in my situation with how I grew up, I still wanted my mom to see what I had changed in my life, and I still wanted her to recognize what I was doing. And, back before the Olympics, when I was still, quote, a junior, so 19 and under, I'd made the junior world team and was ranked number 1 in the world again as a junior. And I was super excited to go talk to her about it. And I was in high school and made the U.S. team, one of the first ones I had made, and I wanted to go tell my mom. I was super excited to go tell her. So I grabbed my girlfriend and we jumped in her car. And she's like, oh, we're going to go finally see your mom, right? And I was like, yeah. So we drive down to Salt Lake, and I'm driving up and down State Street. And finally, my girlfriend at the time was like, what are we doing? Do you not know where your mom lives? And to me, it was just common. I was like, this is normal, right? I was like, no. I was like, well, my mom's kind of a street person, so I'm looking at the hotels, the crack hotels along State Street, to see if I can see her standing outside. And I said, well, let me just stop at one last place. And if she's not there, we'll go back to Roy. And we stopped at the Capitol Motel. And I walked into the manager's office, and I said, hey, do you have a Lillian Archuleta here? And she's like, oh, yeah, she's over in that room right there. And I was like, oh, okay. But I was so excited that I found her, right? And again, it was normal for me, so I'm excited. I was like, oh, my mom's over here. And so we walk over across the parking lot and knock on the door, and my stepdad answers. And I'm like, hey, Boyd, how's it going? He's like, hey, how are you? What are you doing here, right? And he's like, oh, come in. And so we walk into this really tiny space. There's nothing in there except a bed and 2 side desks and a little sink and a tiny little bathroom. And, they're sitting on the bed, and I'm just spilling out. I made this world team, and things going, I'm just vomiting all this information of my excitement. And at one point in time, I look over at my girlfriend, and she just has this crazy like look on her face, and I'm like, what is wrong with her? And I look, and my mom and my stepdad had passed out on the bed. And right then it clicked, and I looked over into the bathroom, and I saw the needles from them just shooting up, and it devastated me as well. And I remember walking out, and I grabbed him, and I was like, let's get out of here. And I'm in tears. And from that point on, I never wanted to go, and I was 16 at the time. And so I never wanted to say anything. And so all these years later, 12 years later, 28, I make the Olympic team. And I'm like, I don't have any interest in going and telling my mom about what's going on. Unfortunately, the media did. And John Saraceno, who was a reporter for ESPN at the time, he's like, wow, we've got this great idea. I've talked to all the reporters, and they want to do an interview with your mom. And I was just like, John, that's not even possible. Just forget about it. He's like, well, what's going on? I was like, just drop it. Just leave it alone. And he kept pushing forward. I was like, listen, my mom's in jail right now, and I don't want anything to do with it. I just want to enjoy that I made the Olympic team and go through and just enjoy this experience. He's like, okay, I get it. I'll leave it alone. Next day, John calls me. He's like, I've got some great news. And I'm like, cool, what is it?
She's out.
I called the jail, and they're willing to let us do an interview with you and your mom in the jail. And I was just like, oh, man. I was like, John, I don't want to do this, man. And he's like, it's great. I've told there's going to be like 60 different media, ESPN, all these media is going to be there. And I just remember it was like the worst feeling. Like I didn't want to have what happened 12 years ago happen there again, especially at jail, right? And I remember walking up, I don't know if you've ever been to the jail in Salt Lake, but there's that long walk up to the jail, and just this horrible feeling inside. And I walk in, and I see all the jailers, and I can hear the clanking of the door cells, and just that terrible feeling inside. And they're like, oh, hey, yeah, we're super excited, and everyone's excited except me. And because I know I knew what was going to happen. And so they escort me back, to where you get on the phone and talk to the other person. And there's a horseshoe behind me of media that would literally fill this entire room. Cameras, media people, everything. And, they're all excited. And I'm sure I had this look of just like, what the hell's going on? I don't even want to be here. And I sit down, and just trying to like, how's this going to go? And I'm just setting myself up for absolute like disaster again. And my mom comes walking. You can hear the doors and clanging again, closing behind her. She comes walking in, and I just looked at her, and she sits down and picks up the phone. I pick up the phone. It's like, hey, Mom. And for the first time, my mom says, son, I am so proud of you. And, I just opened up the floodgates of tears, because for the first time in my life, my mom finally recognized, what I have achieved and what I have accomplished on the biggest stage of my life. And so what I thought was going to be absolute disaster turned into a great moment. And, up until that point, I was always trying to get my mom to stop the drugs and the street life. And, I decided at that point that, I was just going to try and be a role model to her and not try to make her change. And from that point on, she stopped doing drugs and stopped leading the street life. And so it ended up turning out to be a really great moment for me and the family and stuff too. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's something you always want, though. You want the acceptance and acknowledgement of your successes. I mean, you want to share that.
Yeah.
So Salt Lake comes and goes. And so this was my question for you prior to this. So before you're looking at Sydney, then you get this opportunity, and for the Winter Olympics, was there an opportunity to go back to the Summer Olympics in 2 years, or was it just winter from there on out?
Yeah, no, we thought about it several times, but it was. At that point in time, there weren't a whole lot of athletes doing double sports, especially winter and summer. And, I thought about it, but I had to put on, some weight to be a good bobsled athlete. And it was, when you commit to something like that, it's a full-time job. And I just realized that, I'm just going to stay with this and focus on bobsled and continue to see how much more I can accomplish in this sport. And so I just stayed focused on bobsled, and I threw some throwing events at a couple track meets here and there just for fun. And but outside of that, it was just for fun and giggles, and just really focused on bobsled.
And so you finish your Olympics and set your sights on 2006.
Yeah. So my college coach, Dan Walker, who was my multi-events coach at Weber State, would always tell me anytime we did anything really good in practice, he'd always say, any fool could do it once. And he used to say it all the time, and I never really thought about it until I was like, what are you talking about? Any fool could do it once. He's like, well, you just high jumped 7 feet in practice. Anybody can do it once. He's like, well, you prove it to me and go do it again. And so we started building that mentality through our training career that, if you do something once really well, duplicate it and do it again and do it over and over and over again. And so after I made the 2002 Olympics, that was the first thing that came to my head. It's like, any fool could do it once, so go do another Olympics and then go do another one. And so I continued to do, 3 Olympics. So 2006 in Torino, Italy, and then Vancouver in 2010, so that when I retired, I walked away on my terms and not anyone else's, because I didn't want to look back and say I shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that haunts everybody, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Everybody has to second guess what would have been different if I'd done this. But I mean, you really, if your story were to end right there, I mean, that's amazing in and of itself.
Yeah.
From being on the streets to being a 3-time Olympian, silver medalist. I mean, I read through your Wikipedia of all your, it was like 7 pages of awards and medals, and I'm like, holy cow.
Yeah.
So it could have ended there.
Yeah.
And that story would have inspired and helped kids anywhere to know that, you know what, your past doesn't define you.
Yeah.
And not only that, I've had guests on this podcast before talking about living that lifestyle that you lived as a child.
Yeah.
And more often than not, people don't break that chain. Mm-hmm. So your life could have continued down the path that was common to you. It was
could have been another statistic.
Normal. Yeah,
absolutely.
Totally another statistic. You could have been in and out of jail.
Yeah.
Living on the streets. You just don't know.
Yeah.
But you broke that chain because you saw a future that maybe nobody in your family would have seen for you.
Yeah.
But you saw it and you went for it. So I mean, that's inspiring in and of itself. But like we talked the other night, after you accomplish all of those things, where do you go from there?
That's the $1 million question right there. And just like you said, my story could have ended there, and I could have lived a whole life off of that story and inspired and impacted the lives of thousands and thousands of people around the world. But it is what it is. We all have a special calling here while we're on Earth, and sometimes we don't understand exactly what that is. And there's been a lot of times where I've questioned what is my calling, and realized within the last couple of years that my calling is to come from a place of service and utilize my experiences in life to help other people that are dealing with the same thing. And after the 2010 Olympics, retired obviously from sport, and was looking at potentially going to chiropractic school or going into being an entrepreneur. But the reality is I was so used to being at the highest level as an Olympic athlete, traveling the world, doing these fundraisers all around the world and being the highlight of everything I went to, White House visits, doing events with, NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA athletes all around the world, that when all that came to a stop, it was literally I don't even know the best word to describe it. It was a hot, chaotic mess for me. And not only that, I had lost my identity of who I was and didn't really understand how to make that transition from that life to a more normal life. And I was the type of person that I thought I could always figure everything out on my own, and so I never ever asked for help. But that was the once again the beginning of the end, and obviously why we're here to talk about that. Now. But losing my identity of who I was started me on a very bad path of dealing with depression for the first time, realizing what it was and not knowing how to handle it. And, that led from one thing to another where I was, struggling with my relationships, both with my kids and my kids' moms, relationships with my family, relationships with my friends. And it just, as you know, things started piling on. So the depression came along. He started doing some self-isolating, started like coming from that victim mentality standpoint. Why is everyone, out to get me? Why is nothing working for me? Why does my life suck? And then you start adding on things to try and, sugarcoat the pain, if you will, and so started increasing like my drinking and eventually became a full-blown alcoholic, trying to hide it from everyone else, but that wasn't enough. So I started adding on antidepressant medication. That wasn't enough, so I started trying to numb it with the pain pills as well. And so eventually you get to a point where you're doing all of those at the same time, which is obviously a massive recipe for complete disaster. And just continued down that path of negativity and created a life for myself that was as bad as you could potentially get. Somebody asked me on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad was it? And I was like, it was definitely a 10, if not worse. I ended up almost homeless again, lost my relationship with both my son's mom and my daughter's mom. My relationship with my kids literally went south. And bouncing back and forth from different couldn't hold a job, couldn't hold a relationship, and just blamed everything on everyone else. It was everyone else's fault, 100% victim mentality. And that lasted for, a good 8.5 years. And I would say six to 6.5 years into it, it literally pinnacled to the point where I felt like my life was an absolute worthless waste of time. I devalued my whole Olympic career because I didn't understand why things didn't go much better for myself after the Olympics. Several thoughts of flirting with, taking myself out of this world and suicidal thoughts started coming in and just never obviously got to that point. And in December 3rd of 2016, just happened to be a night where I was working and went to an event that I was supposed to be at and drinking, and came home and got into an argument with my live-in partner at the time, and was just like, everything just pinnacled right there at that moment. And I was like, well, you just must not love me. And she's like, mouth something off. I couldn't even tell you what it was, and kind of similar like conversation we had talked about earlier. I was like, well, I'll just take myself out of this world then. And she's like, no, you won't. And I obviously attempted right then and there in our kitchen, and I just recall, honestly, feeling at peace. And not to be super graphic, but I was literally bleeding out right there in front of her in my kitchen, and she runs next door to get the neighbors to come try and save me, and I'm fighting them off, and like I don't want it. I'm done. Just let me go. Just let me be. And I've got these people that I don't even know that are fighting for my life. And I'm fighting to like exit out of this life. And then the ambulance gets there and the medics are there and they're doing everything they can to save my life, and I'm fighting them off. And we go to one hospital and go to the ER, and the on-call ER doctor there, it's about 2 o'clock in the morning. He's like, there's nothing I can do for you here. We've got to get you to the University of Utah. And so they ship me back into the ambulance and send me off to the University of Utah. And the whole time, again, the medics are fighting to save my life. And, all these people, I stress the fact that all these people around me were trying to save my life because, as you know, and everyone else hopefully knows that we have so many people, amazing people around us that are willing to be there for us if we just take time to recognize it and don't think that we need to take everything on ourselves. And we get to the University of Utah, and I kind of remember, because I blacked out several times, and I remember laying in whatever room I was in with just a massive staff of people around me, and they're like, "Oh, we're gonna fix you," and I was like, "No, leave me, just let me go." And next thing I remember, waking up in my hospital room, and doing one of these, and literally pinched myself, and I'm like, "Shit, I'm still alive,
Still here."
and I was pissed. And my grandma and my aunt and my brother were there in my room, and I didn't even know what to say. My grandma came up to me, and that was hard for me to listen to my grandma, my family saying, "Why did you do that? We love you so much." And realizing that, I've created this world for myself of chaos and depression, that, I had all the help around me that I needed if I would have just, for me, swallowed my pride and just reached out and said I needed some help. And, still 2 years after that, I still dealt with a lot of depression and alcoholism, because I was, I then lied to my kids why, I cut my arm pretty significantly. Doctors told me there's no way I should have made it because I lost over 60% of my blood flow in my body. And, you realize it's, whether you want to call it the universe or your Heavenly Father, that you're meant for something else. And, although I struggled for another 2 years, I finally realized, what my calling was. And maybe one of the oddest ways of going about it, having to go through that experience, but, that's what's led me here today, and being able to talk about my experience and talk about, what are some different ways that we can address these issues that we deal with on a daily basis. And, I had a really hard time even talking about it for quite a while. So, that happened in 2016, and I didn't talk about it until 2019 of last year.
Really?
Because I didn't want people to realize that Bill Schuffenhauer, the Olympian, the guy who went from the streets to the Olympic podium, this big success story, I never wanted anyone to see the real me. I always had this mask on all the time, and I didn't want anybody to know that, I dealt with depression, and I dealt with addiction, and I dealt with suicidal thoughts, as well as attempting suicide. And, a good friend one time was having an event that was dealing with suicide and depression, and somehow we got on the subject, and I hadn't told anybody at that point in time, but I just felt compelled, "Oh yeah, I've dealt with depression." He's like, "Oh really? To what level?" And I was like, "Oh man, I just let the cat out of the bag." And so I started telling the story, and he's like, "You've got to come and talk at my event. You've got to tell your story. You could help so many people." And I'm like, "No way. It's not going to happen." And so we left it at that, and he's like, "Well, I still want you to come to the event. It's a great event." And so that night I went home, and I don't talk about it a whole lot, but I'm very spiritual, and I went home and I prayed about it. And the next morning I woke up with this overwhelming feeling and this voice telling me, "You've got to go tell your story. You've got to go tell your story, because as many people as you've impacted with your story of being homeless and going to the Olympics, you're going to impact that many more people with your story of how you dealt with depression, addiction, and suicide." And it just continued to click more and more for me. And I called my friend up and I said, "Hey, I'll talk about it." And went to the event, and I've been a motivational speaker for 20 years. You're used to preparing a whole talk and your talking points and your excitement points and your stories. And I was, whatever, something was just telling me, just get up there and speak from your heart and just tell your story. And so I did. And what felt for me the longest time on a stage, if you will, it was at a private home here locally, but and I felt like I was just fumbling because I was crying again, because it was the first time I've told this story that I didn't want anybody to know. And I finished up and I walked outside and back to the house. And the whole time I was just thinking that was probably the stupidest thing. Like, now I'm not going to get booked for speaking events, and now nobody's going to want to come to me to be their mentor, their coach. And, you know, I just ruined my whole career by telling people that I was depressed and suicidal. Because at this point in time, right, as not just guys, but human beings, we're taught that, you know, talking about that type of stuff is a weakness, and we shouldn't talk about that, and we shouldn't be vulnerable. And so I literally just thought I shot myself in the foot. And as I'm out there trying to gather myself together and still in tears, literally one person after another at this event comes walking out, and they said, "Hey, we are so thankful that you were vulnerable enough to tell your story, because I have a story just like yours. And I've never thought it was okay enough to talk about it. But you're Bill Schuffenhauer, you're the Olympic athlete. And if it's okay for you to tell your story, then I feel like it's okay for me to tell mine." And I just went, wow, like maybe I've got something here. And, you know, I realized that as impactful as my story was of talking about going from the streets and foster care to the Olympics, you know, I always ask people, like, how many Olympians do you know that grew up homeless and went to the Olympics? And the answer is always one: me. Yeah. And I'll ask people, you know, just like I ask you, well, then how many people do you know that deal with suicide, depression, and addiction? And it's a lot. And I just realized then and there, I was like, you know what, I have an opportunity, and it's part of my life calling to tell my story as much as I possibly can, to help people realize that it's okay to talk about their situation. Because it's not that we're not talking about suicide, it's not that we're not talking about depression, it's not that we're not talking about addiction. The problem that we still face is that how do we get that person that's in that deep, dark place to talk about it on their own? And, you know, I looked at it as you know, my one of the thoughts came up in my head was my son. And, you know, he likes sports, and I was like, gosh, if LeBron James told my son to cartwheel up and down the street every day the rest of his life so that he could be eventually as good as LeBron James, that's exactly what my son would do. And I thought, well, if I could take other people, whether they're influencers or not, to open up and be vulnerable about their story of depression, suicide, and addiction, if it's all three or all four or just one, but to open up and talk about their story, then that's going to give permission to other people to potentially talk about it on their own and try and, you know, cut it off before anything negative or bad happens again. So,
I think there's this image in our head that, well, and especially in the youth, that, yeah, well, somebody like me shouldn't feel that way.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, when you see a hero or like yourself, an Olympian, somebody that's made it and says, hey, you know what? It can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
The one thing we see in suicide prevention, it doesn't matter what color, it doesn't matter what age, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or you're poor. It affects everybody.
Yeah.
And like you said, when you reach out and you know, we'd mentioned, you know, off air, saying in high school I didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
But as I go into schools now, and I'll say, raise your hand if you know someone or have lost somebody to suicide. 80% or more
at least
raise their hands. Yeah. And I just think, if it hasn't affected your family yet,
it will.
It will. And that's just a reality of where we're at. And so as people come out and have the guts to lay it out there and just say, listen, this is what I went through, and this is how I'm still here. This is how I was able to get out of it. I think that's you found your calling.
Yeah.
And I really believe that the whole story is what you're supposed to share.
Yeah.
And it will affect people everywhere you go.
Yeah. And, you know, and again, it is one of those things where, you know, an odd way to discover what your calling is. Yeah. But I'm so thankful, because just like your foundation, life is worth living. And I'm so thankful I was given that opportunity to continue my life and continue to have an opportunity to share that story with people, you know, whether it's in our local community or people all around the world. And, you know, if I can help one person out of that darkness, you know, that's great. If I can help thousands, that's even better. And, you know, my goal, outside of just helping people out of that is to also get, as I mentioned before, get other people to talk about their experience and their stories to help other people and just kind of create that, almost that pay it forward, if you will, and just help, because as human beings, our basic foundation is to come from a place of service and help one another out. And, sometimes I think we forget about that and forget about the importance of who we are as human beings. And so try to get people back to that space and helping one another out is what I ultimately would like to get accomplished.
I think it's amazing what you're doing. And you're a big part of an event we did a few weeks back before Christmas. And it's funny, so our mutual friend John Absey's been telling me, dude, you got to get Bill. You got to get Bill over there, and we need Bill to be part of this. And I'm like,
Bill who?
Do you think Bill's willing to do it? Oh yeah, don't worry about it. Bill will do it.
Well, it's that's John. Yeah. So it's funny. My girlfriend, who's obviously sitting on the side of us, that's how John introduced me to her. He's like, oh, just call her. Do you want to introduce us first? No, she's awesome. You're awesome, and she's awesome. You guys will just get along. It's like, that's John. So I love John. He's such a great guy.
He's a stud, and so
what a great event.
Yeah, you know what? It was a special night. They told me, they said, listen, what we'll do is we'll play this video of you crying, and you won't have to get on the stage. We won't make a fool out of you. You'll just do the video part, because I have this problem that I'm terrible. And especially when you're dealing with a sad issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel what people feel, and so that was a tough thing. And I'm like, okay, well, they're not going to ask us to go up there. And then when it's live, what do you do?
Yeah, you don't have a choice.
It's like, okay. So, I come home and my son goes, bro, really? You cried right out of the gate?
What'd you want me to do?
You didn't even take a few minutes and just right out of the gate you're crying. Yeah. But, it was a special night. We were able to raise over $18,000 in an hour,
That's
hour
amazing.
And a half, whatever that event was.
And
with COVID, as a motivational speaker, how that's affected.
Oh, absolutely.
We've been shut down. We haven't had the ability to get out and raise the money to help people. And the problem hasn't stopped.
Yeah.
People need us more than they may have ever needed us before, but we've been, because of social distancing and things, we've not been able to do what we do. And you can have as many Zoom meetings as you want, but you miss that human connection. We all are craving that.
Yeah.
And so that's been the most difficult thing, I think, to get through this year. It's been really hard. But man, you coming and being part of that event was huge for us, and so we can't thank you enough. And
yeah, it was an honor for me, and I appreciate that you guys asked and gave me an opportunity to jump on stage with you guys and talk a little bit about my story as well.
I love that, and I really believe that your story needs to be heard by so many, and this is a small way to get through the podcast to be able to get that story out to people, but somebody that is hearing this podcast now, how do they find out more about you?
Yeah, I'm a pretty wide open book. I have a website, which is olympianspeaks.com. I'm working on my own nonprofit that deals with suicide and depression, and so hopefully we'll launch that, because I'm going to come to you and try and get some information, but it's all about collaboration and stuff too. I'm a big believer in collaboration, but they can just contact me on olympianspeaks.com. I'm on Facebook, but I respond to every single person that hits me up. Or my personal cell phone's on my website. Maybe not the smartest thing, but I want to make sure that people know that I'm accessible, and because I'm just as human as you and anyone else that's walking the street, and want people to be able to, if I can be a resource for them, just to talk or whatever, I want to make sure that I'm accessible to them. So
now, and I imagine this would be a great thing for schools.
Yeah.
It would be a great thing for businesses.
Yeah.
Anywhere that you think that your story would help, so people can reach out to you, and you're still available now for speaking engagements and everything, whether it's a virtual thing or in
done
person.
Lots of virtual ones already. So
well, that's amazing. And so give us a website one more time.
olympianspeaks.com.
olympianspeaks.com. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming out, hanging out with me for an hour tonight in the big city of Tooele.
Hey, it's great out here.
and just coming out and being able to share that with us. I really appreciate it, and I can't thank you enough. And I hope you have a great night tonight at the Comfort Inn and Suites in Lake Point.
Yeah.
Give them a call, 801-250-3600. They got a beautiful Porsche in the lobby.
They do.
The hotel was built for the racetrack out here, and so it's real close to I-80. If you're passing through Tooele County on I-80, stop and spend a night out here. If you live in Tooele County and you've got family coming out for the holidays and you don't want them in your house,
Put them out.
put them in a hotel. Put them in a hotel. So check out Comfort Inn and Suites. And also, if you're coming out here and thinking about looking at what this valley has to offer in way of homes, check out A. Warner Homes Real Estate or give her a call at 801-867-5078. And if you're looking at this model home, if you're watching this video and you're not just listening to the audio only, GTM Builders is a great builder. They're the largest builder in Tooele Valley. And so check them out at gtmbuilders.com. And, one thing that I like to button up each episode with is like Bill has talked about tonight, it's never a good idea to isolate. It's never a good idea to try to bear that whole burden on your shoulders. If you're in a place that's scaring you and you're having thoughts that you just know are not right, you're hearing those feeling those feelings or hearing those things that the world would be better off without you, it's just simply not true. So please, if you're having those thoughts, find somebody you can trust. Talk to them. Tell a friend. Tell a family member. And you'll be surprised how many people are in your corner and want you to be here tomorrow. If you don't feel you have that person, reach out to the Lifeline. Give them a call at 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 1-800-273-8255. There's someone that will take that call 365 days a year, 24/7. So don't hesitate if you just need to vocalize it and get that out to somebody. Don't believe the lies. We need you here. Everybody brings something to the table.
Yeah.
We often don't know what it is that we bring, but you definitely bring something special, and we need you here. Yeah. So we love you, and we look forward to having you back next week. But thanks, Bill, for coming out tonight.
Thanks, John, for having me.
I sure appreciate you.
I appreciate you, and if there's anything else I can do to help with your foundation and just help with the movement, never hesitate to ask.
Okay, you
Please.
got it.
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.